Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a fascinating linguistic deep dive into one of theology's most famous and honestly most debated concepts, the rapture. Whether you know your biblical eschatology inside and out, or you're just curious about how translating ancient Greek into the English language shapes modern beliefs, we're going to trace a single, highly compelling physical pattern straight through history. So, where does the concept of the rapture actually come from? It's a massive question that always sparks intense discussion. Is it just some modern theological invention, a poetic metaphor, or is it something deeply rooted in ancient language and actual historical events? Okay, let's dive into this because the source material we're analyzing today argues that the answer lies not in abstract theory, but in a very specific, verifiable linguistic pattern established long before the prophecy was ever even written. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the Greek word harpazo. Then, we'll examine two historical precedents, case 1 with Philip and case 2 with the Apostle Paul. Finally, we'll look at how this applies to the future of the church. All right, let's kick things off with section 1, the word. It's actually pretty incredible to think about, but the entire argument we're examining today, it literally hinges on one specific Greek root word, harpazo. According to the source, if you don't fully grasp the exact action described by this specific word, you kind of miss the wider mystery entirely. It is the absolute linchpin of the whole theological framework. See, when scholars look at harpazo, they aren't translating it into English as a simple to move or to go. Not at all. It translates specifically to phrases like to snatch away, to pull suddenly, or to remove by divine power. You can really feel the inherent energy there, right? We're talking about a forceful, physical, and profoundly unannounced snatching. Moving right along to section 2, case 1, Philip snatched away. Before getting into any predictions about the future, the source argues that the biblical text actually establishes a firm historical precedent first. In the book of Acts, chapter 8, it reads, "The Spirit of the Lord snatched Philip away." And here's the kicker. The original Greek text uses harpason. That is a direct, past tense conjugation of our core root word harpazo. Now, the crucial point is what happens next. Philip doesn't just, walk away. The text notes his next destination is Azotus, also known as Ashdod, which is dozens of kilometers away. No travel time, 0 vehicles. According to the text, he literally vanished in a split second and instantly appeared in another city. The source text presents this as an undeniably literal physical removal by divine power, a true historical harpazo in action. Which brings us to section 3, case 2, Paul caught up. If the story of Philip was just an isolated incident, well, you might just call it an anomaly. But the source argues this was an intentional, recurring pattern. Over in 2 Corinthians, Paul describes a man, widely understood to be himself, who was caught up to the third heaven. And guess what exact Greek word is used for caught up here? It's harpazenta. Yep, another direct conjugation of harpazo. The source document really makes a point to emphasize that this wasn't framed as just a dream or some poetic allegory. Paul heard unutterable words, and he was so completely overwhelmed he actually wrote, "Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know." The text insists this is a real, superhuman historical event. It totally solidifies the pattern that a harpazo is a literal, overwhelming divine action. And that leads us straight into section 4, the future of the church. This is where the whole linguistic argument really reaches its climax. The source takes those two established historical precedents we just talked about and connects them directly to future prophecy. The Apostle Paul writes to the Thessalonians regarding the future of the church, "We will be caught up in the clouds." And as you might have guessed by now, the Greek word he chooses there is harpagosamatha, which derives perfectly from harpazo. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact alignment across these three events. Philip's physical removal is associated with harpasen. Paul's supernatural experience uses harpagenta. And the future fate of the church, that relies on harpagesamatha. We basically have 3 distinct literal events, totally separated by time and context, yet they are completely linked by the exact same Greek root. The linguistic thread is absolutely unbroken. So the source uses all this to build a pretty compelling timeline. First, God physically removes Philip. Second, God catches Paul up to the third heaven. It is only after these 2 undeniable physical precedents are firmly established that Paul reveals the future event catching up the church. The core argument here is that God intentionally set a historical pattern so that readers would understand the future prophecy as a literal promise of physical removal, not just pretty poetry. Bringing it all together, what are the core theological takeaways based on this linguistic deep dive? Well, first, it relies entirely on sola scriptura, meaning by scripture alone, tracing the original Greek into its English translation to build its case. Second, it argues the rapture is absolutely not some newly invented concept, but rather a grounded biblical pattern of literal, physical events. And finally, this linguistic framework is used to robustly support a pre-tribulation viewpoint. Basically, the idea that this sudden snatching away happens to the church before a prophesied period of global hardship. It really is a fascinating way to construct a major theological argument just using pure linguistics and historical sequencing. Which leaves us with a much bigger question to ponder as we wrap up. If historical precedents and the careful tracing of ancient root words shape prophetic interpretation this dramatically, how else might a deep dive into original language change the way we read and understand other ancient texts?